Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Lando Norris is still the reigning F1 champion of 2025, but he doesn't get talked about much this season because McLaren have not been a hugely relevant part of this title battle so far, despite being the 24 and 25 Constructors champions and winning the drivers last year. That may be about to change. According to rumours, there is a major upgrade in the works to Miami, alongside Ferrari bringing some big changes as well, but Ferrari's engine boost, that's still a way down the line. McLaren have the Mercedes power unit, and they feel confident that they can actually take the challenge to the big dogs this season. From us and to your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new. As always, the Hamilton Tokyo Drift Edition 3 video is finally here. Couple of updates around the world, starting with Albert Park. You guys may have heard this story, but just if you didn't, the old pit building in Melbourne, as soon as the Grand Prix this year was done, was set to be demolished, and we actually have some footage of that. So they've wiped it all out. They're building a new paddock, building a new pit building, basically in time for next year. But yeah, it was an interesting Grand Prix to say the very least. Beautiful part of the world, that is for sure. Some Aston Martin update. Of course, they failed to finish that Grand Prix. Was that not the one where Alonso came back from the dead or whatever, when he went to the pits for a few laps and then magically came out back onto the track again for some testing, effectively? And that's where Aston Martin find themselves. Some questions on what the chassis really looks like. There is a feeling that at some point they will probably fix the engine, or they'll find a solution. Honda will get better. Look, there are upgrades to be brought. We know the ADUO exists. Honda are way behind Mercedes. They will get upgrade after upgrade after upgrade until presumably eventually they spend enough money and catch up. That's how it currently looks, but who really knows? Whenever that happens, how good really is the chassis? That's the question, I think. It was a fascinating design when it was first unveiled, but we've not really got to see much of it because it's been either not running, at the back of the grid. Certainly some interesting ideas on that car. Now, Adrian Newey said that he was expecting, with big upgrades to come, that the Aston will be basically the best chassis by the middle of the season. That was a suggestion that he made before the season got underway. Pretty bold claim. And first of all, it's got to be difficult to develop when you can't even really get good data in some of the higher speed corners because you don't have the power. What it looks like, just in terms of the analysis of the car, because we haven't really talked that much about it really apart from the engine troubles and the vibrations and all of this. The mid and low speed corners, they're actually pretty good. The high speed stuff, however, not so much. That is where some of the concerns currently lie. And as Scott Mitchell-Malm says, it's very difficult to actually develop a car with the engine deficit they presently have, and that isn't exactly going away. Just to put it into context, this is the championship. As a reminder, we have no Bahrain, no Saudi Arabia. So the next race is in Miami right at the start of May. Then we go to Canada. Then we go to Monaco. So Monaco is round 8 of the season. Will be round 6 because of the 2 cancellations or maybe postponements. There has been some talk about Saudi maybe still having a Grand Prix in like September. But that was the talk. But I'm looking in September and I'm thinking, well, where would you even do it? There's only 1 free weekends, and that would make 4 back-to-back weekends. Unlikely, but maybe necessary. I don't know. Anyway, Miami, Canada, Monaco. We know that Spain is often a big upgrade target. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of upgrades around this point in the season as well. But big ones will arrive to Miami. Of course, not the ideal sign for upgrades or point for upgrades because it's a sprint weekend, right? So you've not got an awful lot of practice running. But Monaco, I think, is going to be fascinating for a number of reasons. There is a feeling that, well, maybe Ferrari can actually win a Grand Prix there. It's not going to be as engine-based, really, performance you would think around that circuit. It should be more on the chassis side. And also in the mediums and low-speed corners, the Aston might actually be okay. So maybe that's the plan. Score some points in Monaco. That might be the idea. And Newey clearly has upgrades in the works that he believes will make the car, and from a chassis perspective, very, very competitive. But the car is not good in fast corners. Partly engine, partly chassis, but it's pretty good elsewhere. So we'll see what next to Aston Martin. They might be able to bring a new engine for Miami. So just to keep in mind, I guess, they are allowed reliability upgrades if they can say that it's actually for reliability. It's always a bit of a grey area because, of course, if you bring a reliability upgrade, that will improve performance, theoretically, because you can run the engine a bit harder because it's now more reliable. So that's something to consider. The team, though, will be granted the additional development upgrade opportunities or whatever, and they will be able to run with that in the long term. That's also, we think, true for Ferrari, for Audi, but by the time those properly upgraded versions arrive, at least from a performance perspective, not just a reliability perspective, that's quite a way down the line, and that's why McLaren are the subject of discussion today. I think more generally, there is a conversation on the Mercedes power unit. We talked over the last few days that the Ferrari might be something like 25 horsepower down. And that is a huge deficit that once overcome, assuming that they can, they should be right in the mix because they arguably, Ferrari, have the best chassis of anyone right now. The fact that Ferrari were the key challenger to Mercedes in both Melbourne and in Shanghai, not so in Japan. McLaren are right back in the mix there. Maybe makes more sense, a little bit more power reliance than we had seen previously. That we'll see if that continues, but I think it's very impressive that Ferrari was so close really to Mercedes. Yeah, they weren't in race pace quite close enough, but they gave it a pretty good go in those opening couple of rounds. If anything, given that Mercedes engine advantage, it should be McLaren who are their chief rivals. We saw that, and you know, they're the reigning champions for a reason, right? They've not forgotten how to build a car. It was always inevitable that with the new regulations, with all the complexities of these new engines, and also the amount of work that McLaren put in to their title bids over the last couple of years, Mercedes were always going to be the favourites this year as the factory team over McLaren. But, you know, McLaren are still the reigning champions and Lando is the World Drivers' Champion. We've not, as I say, talked much about him this season. And he's been relatively anonymous, not necessarily his fault. Piastri's been, he was certainly better in Japan. Some of that isn't necessarily Lando's fault. He was stuck in the garage for a long time. And at least, I guess, he didn't crash before the race started in Melbourne, so he did score a few points, and then neither of them started the Chinese Grand Prix. So it's been a bit of a painful one for Lando, and for Oscar, of course, although that did turn around in Japan. But then you've got Alpine, where to put them in the mix, because they've been getting stronger and stronger. Gasly, I think, has been driving really well. I think in sprints and Grand Prix, Gasly is currently 4-0 against Max Verstappen this season. You thought I was going to say Colapinto, but no, against Max Verstappen. So he's handling a very much inferior Red Bull right now with an Alpine which is clearly good enough to at least be respectable with the Mercedes power unit. And Gasly says it's not going to happen over a month, but after the summer break I think we can maybe get to where McLaren and Ferrari are. That is the goal for Alpine, to be right in the mix of the chasing pack. George Russell's given a few comments as well on the state of affairs at Mercedes. He said, "I never doubted that Mercedes would give me the car. We were on the back foot at the start of 2022, but I admire the team and always believed they were going to give me the car that was going to be capable of fighting for wins and for the championships." The question, I guess, then becomes, interesting title fight, George. It's not really going to plan right now against Antonelli. There have been some suggestions. David Coulthard said, "Drop the nice guy image, George, and fight Antonelli aggressively." I kind of hear this on some level, but also, I think everyone knows the kind of character that George really is. Whatever front he puts on for the media, this guy won't be happy about what Antonelli's currently doing. But equally, Russell can't be too dissatisfied because he's had reliability issues in both China and in Japan, which have affected, this situation to at least a certain extent. Of course, Japan was unfortunate also with the safety car. Reliability was less true in Japan as it was in China, but the setup decisions they made and went the wrong way, as far as we understand. So I think it's too early to say, Russell's bottling it, he's got to change his approach or something. That's a conversation more for the summer break, depending how the championship looks then. I think George will still be understandably confident for now. But it wasn't long ago that there was lots of talk about Max to Mercedes and potentially George being forced the other way to Red Bull. Right now, Red Bull is not where you want to go. And of course, these are pictures from last year, but Red Bull has made a better engine than Ferrari, as we've discussed over the last couple of days. But in terms of a chassis, the Ferrari is nearly a second a lap faster. And that's when the discussion once again shifts to infrastructure. So over the last few years, we've talked about this relatively frequently. The Cold War War era wind tunnel that Red Bull are operating with. They finally, I think next year, maybe later this year, have the new wind tunnel online after years of building it. But definitely their simulation tools way behind the curve. And when Newey is there, maybe you can get away with it, right? Because he sees the air in his head or whatever. But maybe for this generation, it just ain't happening, right? And Newey left while Red Bull was behind on infrastructure. And that wind tunnel correlation has only got worse. The new ideas can't be implemented if the simulation tools aren't working properly. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, and even Aston have better instrumentation than Red Bull. I like how it says even Aston Martin, because they absolutely should, right? Like, Aston Martin should have the highest tech stuff in the entire world with all the money they've spent on that Silverstone factory, of course. So, this is a problem for Red Bull. It's a problem that's been ongoing for some time, but it has caused Pierre Waché to be under some degree of pressure, right? There is a feeling that, well, from the middle of 2024, kind of when Newey departed the team, you then have a failed 2025 season where they didn't win. They gave it a good go with the upgrades, but their car definitely wasn't the same as it was. McLaren came from nowhere in the ground effect era to become the dominant force in terms of machinery towards the end of that cycle. Verstappen and Hadjar both have massively complained about aerodynamic imbalance on the car. So Waché's under pressure, right? Newey's now gone. Waché is where the buck stops. The car isn't good enough. So that does fall on him. But equally, there is reason to understand that Waché is still quite highly regarded. In fact, Giuliano de Kessa says that he had a lot of interest from Fred Vasseur and Ferrari, and his opinion to Kessa is that if Red Bull is lackluster, which they are, if they blame it on someone like Waché and get rid of him for it, he should be snapped up immediately. He also went on to discuss that a Verstappen-Leclerc title fight would feed families, which I do agree with. But this is a picture here of which doesn't look photoshopped, although it kind of does, but I think this is a real picture. Maybe not, I don't know. But anyway, these are the two gentlemen. Loic Serra on the right, who is now with Ferrari, former Mercedes man, worked with Hamilton for a long time, now kind of calling the shots over there at the Ferrari side. Then Pierre Waché. These guys, good friends, they've been around a long time together, both Frenchmen, of course, so there is something in that, and there is a feeling that if Red Bull pull the trigger and they say, well, either Waché is the scapegoat, or they believe that actually no, he has made bad decisions and something has to happen as a result, and they were to get rid of him in that scenario, Fred Vasseur and Ferrari might be pretty quick to snap him up. That is the current feeling. But let's talk about where McLaren lie, because it's a challenging start to the season for them. The reliability concerns have arguably been the biggest problem, and in terms of the constructors, they're already way behind, right? Mercedes have basically dominated every single race, every single weekend. McLaren didn't even start in China, but they turned up to Japan. They were the second most competitive car. There was a brief threat. They could even put it on pole position, and Piastri was genuinely giving Russell a very hard time. Russell came close to overtaking him in the first stint, but couldn't get it done, and then he fell back, and then he fell away, and Russell went from being half a second behind to 1.72 seconds behind by the time they came into the pits. Then, as we know, the safety car bailed out Antonelli, and then he was off into the distance. I would have been fascinated to see as well, because I think this picture here is Antonelli behind Norris, and we know that Norris frustrated Kimi for plenty of laps as well, despite Lando not having a smooth weekend by any means. McLaren say Mercedes aren't holding anything back. I mean, in fact, the regulations don't allow them to hold anything back in terms of, the information, I suppose. It's like, this is our engine, this is how to use it, and you can put it in your car and off you go. They still don't have to tell them everything, though. Like, Stella can say what he likes, but in terms of software, I think the rule basically says they have to be capable of running on the same software, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Mercedes software has to be identical to what the other teams are going to use. And of course, Mercedes are going to try and find an advantage there. McLaren have embarrassed them for the last few years, so it's about time from Mercedes' perspective they feel like they get revenge. But I think inevitably, McLaren should get closer. The first weekend, they clearly were very clueless on the power units from Mercedes, the recharge and all of that. They were losing a tons of time. It seems like that by Japan, they at least, would you say half the deficit, but are definitely making progress on how to get the best out of the Merc power unit and maybe not cause any more torque spikes to send Piastri into the wall before the Grand Prix has even started. But the reliability has obviously not been great, has it, right? Like, from top to bottom, it's not been smooth sailing at McLaren, but Piastri is 25 as of today, and Piastri gave a few thoughts as well on Ferrari. He says, the Ferrari's interesting. I would say it almost looks like they're better than the Mercedes in the corners, but they're worse in terms of power unit or drag. It's probably a bit of both. So McLaren are obviously discussing how they get back to where they would like to be, because for Oscar Piastri's perspective, he, don't want to say should, but his title collapse last year was probably not talked about enough in many respects. It seemed almost nailed on that he was going to be last year's Drivers' Champion. That didn't happen, of course. Norris made a great comeback. Verstappen threw himself into the mix as well. But as we know, that could be their only chance to win a championship. We talked about this last year. The new regulations were likely to favour Mercedes. You never know when those drivers are going to be back into the mix again. Could be this year, still could be next year for sure. But if it is going to be this year, big changes need to happen. Now, they've got the engine for it, that is for sure. And Mercedes, to their credit, have clearly also produced a great chassis. McLaren are a little bit heavy, we think, possibly. Certainly a little bit draggy, we think, as well. So there is room for improvement, and it's difficult to imagine that they can, challenge Mercedes immediately and bring like a mid-2023 upgrade that we saw from, Austria 2023, that completely turned the tide of the battle over the next couple of seasons. But there is reportedly a big upgrade on the way. Now, of course, every team will have some sort of upgrade, but David Croft says, I think McLaren will have a big upgrade in Miami that they are very satisfied with in terms of the results the simulator has given them. So presumably their simulator tool's better than Red Bull's, so they can be confident for a reason. But that's the feeling right now. Now, Giuliano De Chessa backs this up in the replies and says basically big package, right? So, yeah, there's a serious element that's coming to the new McLaren, of course. That will be no surprise to anyone. And theoretically, in terms of development ceiling and all of that, you'd think McLaren have more room for improvement. And the benefit they have is that they do have the Mercedes power unit. They've got a month to really dive into, okay, how are Mercedes able to extract more performance from it and on some power demanding circuits, of which Miami is certainly one to a great extent. They could be right there, So I think for Ferrari, they will still hope to be Mercedes' closest challenger, but if McLaren have a big package on the way, which they do, and they have the ability to maybe unlock more from the engine than we have seen so far, it might be an uphill battle for Ferrari until they get granted the ADUO to bring a new engine at some point in the future. But compared to Ferrari, because as we understand, Ferrari have a lot they're working on as well. They've got the Macarena Wing 3.0, they've got this new floor tweak, they've got the winglets on the halo, they've got some cooling elements at the front of the car as well. There's several things that Ferrari are bringing, and De Chessa says it's pretty similar, right? So we've talked about this big Ferrari package, there's clearly a big McLaren package coming as well. But obviously for McLaren, there's slightly more to it than just the aero, because as time goes forwards, they should be getting stronger on the power unit side, and that makes them more of a threat. So is the championship still alive for McLaren? Obviously, it's still alive. We're 3 rounds into the season, but in all likelihood, what they will be is a spoiler to Ferrari for the immediate term. Because if Ferrari have hopes to win this championship, and I think they are probably best positions if any other team to challenge Mercedes, is just because they have both, first of all, phenomenal drivers at Ferrari. Of course, that's also true for McLaren, but I don't think to quite the same extent. But Ferrari arguably have the best package. It seems like they have a great understanding of these regulations. And if they magically turned up tomorrow with an engine just as good as Mercedes, they would arguably be winning Grand Prix right now and be in the mix for the championship. But if McLaren spend the next few rounds ahead of Ferrari because they can get closer to Mercedes with this upgrade and the engine stuff, then assuming by some point, if Ferrari do have a better power unit, it might be too little too late in terms of the championship fight. But look, McLaren will be confident that they can still try and find a way to defend their title again. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.